A husband rejected his pregnant wife after 15 years of marriage. When she discovered his betrayal, she broke down in tears. No one could have imagined what would happen next. A story of resilience and hope that will touch your heart. Welcome back. Leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, and enjoy the story. Fiona stood frozen in her quaint Newport kitchen, the pregnancy test trembling in her hand as she stared at her husband Gregory's cold, distant expression. After 15 years of marriage and countless fertility treatments, the miracle they had once desperately prayed for had finally happened. But instead of joy, Gregory's face showed only shock and anger. The late afternoon sunlight streamed through. The bay windows, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors they had installed together 5 summers ago. "I can't do this," he said flatly, his voice hollow as the wooden spoon Fiona had been using to stir pasta sauce clattered to the floor, leaving a splash of red that resembled blood against the white tile. "I don't want this baby." The words hung in the air between them, as tangible as the antique crystal chandelier that Gregory had surprised her with on their 10th anniversary. Fiona clutched the edge of the marble countertop, her knuckles whitening as she struggled to process his words. At 43, she had long ago filed away her dreams of motherhood, tucking them beside the collection of never-used baby name books hidden in her bedside drawer. "What do you mean?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the bubbling sauce on the stove. "We've tried for so long. All those doctors, all those treatments—" Her words trailed off as she watched Gregory's expression harden, his familiar face suddenly appearing foreign to her, as if she were looking at a stranger wearing her husband's features. Without offering an explanation, Gregory turned and walked out of the kitchen. The front door closed with a decisive click that sounded to Fiona like the period at the end of a 15-year sentence. She remained motionless, listening as his car engine started and the sound of tires on gravel faded into the distance. The sauce boiled over, hissing as it hit the burner, but Fiona couldn't move. Her hand drifted to her still flat stomach, resting there as if to shield the tiny life inside from the rejection it had just experienced. The kitchen timer chimed cheerfully, oblivious to the devastation that had just occurred. The following morning, Fiona woke expecting to find Gregory's side of the bed occupied, his unexpected reaction explained away as momentary shock. Instead, the sheets remained undisturbed, his pillow still bearing the indent from the previous morning. She reached for her phone, finding no missed calls or messages. With trembling fingers, she dialed his number. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3. His voicemail greeted her, the recorded pleasantness of his voice a cruel contrast to yesterday's coldness. "Gregory, please call me back. We need to talk about this." Her voice cracked as she ended the call, uncertain whether her message would ever be heard. Days passed with no word. Fiona moved through her routines mechanically, watering the garden of coastal plants they had cultivated together, feeding the tabby cat that had adopted them 3 summers ago, and continuing her work as an interior designer, all while keeping her phone within arm's reach. Each evening, she prepared dinner for 2, allowing herself the small fiction that Gregory might walk through the door, apologetic and ready to embrace their future. The first indication that Gregory's departure was more than a temporary absence came a week later when Fiona noticed his favorite leather jacket missing from the hall closet. The following day, his collection of vintage nautical maps disappeared from the study. Each subtraction was a new wound, precisely inflicted when she was away from the house. As her first prenatal appointment approached, Fiona faced the cruel reality of attending alone. The waiting room of the medical center overlooking Newport Harbor was filled with couples sitting close, hands entwined as they shared the intimate excitement of impending parenthood. The nurse called Fiona's name twice before she registered, it rising from her seat with a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Will your husband be joining us today?" the obstetrician asked, as Fiona changed into the paper gown. "He's unavoidably detained," she replied, the lie easier than explaining a truth she herself didn't understand. The whooshing sound of her baby's heartbeat filled the examination room, strong and insistent. Tears slid down Fiona's cheeks as she listened to the evidence of the life growing within her, a miracle that had arrived too late to save her marriage, but perhaps just in time to save her. As February turned to March, Fiona's secret became increasingly difficult to maintain. The traditional Easter Sunday gathering she had hosted for years was approaching, and the thought of facing their friends and neighbors without Gregory by her side filled her with dread. Each morning she stood sideways before the mirror, charting the subtle changes in her body that soon would be impossible to disguise. It was during one such moment of contemplation that a knock at the door startled. Nancy, her 78-year-old neighbor, stood on the porch with a potted hyacinth. "I haven't seen Gregory's car in the driveway lately," she said, her eyes kind but searching as Fiona accepted the fragrant plant. "And you've been keeping to yourself more than usual." The compassion in the elderly woman's face broke something in Fiona. Before she could stop herself, the story poured out: the positive pregnancy test, Gregory's cold rejection, his unexplained disappearance. When she finished, she expected to see pity in Nancy's weathered face. Instead, she saw recognition. "Come have tea with me tomorrow," Nancy said, patting Fiona's hand. "I have a story to tell you that might help." If you are enjoying the story, type 5 in the comments and subscribe for more videos like this. If not, type 0. It helps me create even better content for you. Continuing, the Easter gathering arrived with relentless punctuality. Fiona considered cancelling, but couldn't bear the thought of breaking a tradition that marked the beginning of spring in their coastal community. She spent hours preparing deviled eggs, glazed ham, and the lemon tarts that Gregory always claimed were better than his mother's. The familiar routines offered temporary distraction from the hollowness that had become her constant companion. As guests filled the house with chatter and laughter, the questions about Gregory's absence became impossible to deflect. "Working overseas," Fiona explained repeatedly, the words tasting bitter on her tongue. A project came up suddenly. Each lie added a new layer of shame, wrapping around her like the cardigan she wore to disguise her changing figure. Nancy arrived last, her keen eyes taking in Fiona's strained smile and the way she subtly redirected conversations away from her absent husband. When the gathering ended and the last guests departed, Nancy remained, silently helping to clear away plates smeared with the remnants of celebration. "I was 25 when it happened to me," Nancy said as they stood side by side at the kitchen sink, her gnarled hands plunging into the soapy water with surprising strength. "Frank and I had been married just 3 years when I discovered I was expecting. He said he wasn't ready, that we'd agreed to wait. The next morning he was gone." Fiona paused in drying a crystal serving bowl that had belonged to her grandmother. "What did you do?" "I survived," Nancy replied simply, "and then eventually I thrived, in ways I never could have with Frank." She pointed to a photograph on Fiona's refrigerator, showing Nancy surrounded by a large family at what appeared to be a graduation celebration. "That's my daughter Rebecca's oldest, getting his medical degree. Frank missed everything, the first steps, the school plays, the science fair trophies. But most importantly, he missed the chance to become the man he could have been by staying." The elderly woman's story offered Fiona her first glimpse of a possible future, one that included her child, but not Gregory. It was terrifying yet strangely liberating, like standing at the edge of Newport's famous cliff walk. The drop perilous, but the view breathtaking. 3 months into her pregnancy, with morning sickness finally relenting, Fiona faced a new crisis. Her quarterly property tax notice arrived marked overdue. Second notice. A red stamp she had never seen before. Puzzled and concerned, she called the bank that held their mortgage, only to discover that no payments had been made for 3 months. Further investigation revealed their joint accounts had been systematically emptied, leaving only enough to disguise the theft for a short time. The home she had lovingly renovated room by room, the 1920s colonial with its view of the bay where they had planned to grow old together, was weeks away from foreclosure. Panic rose in her throat like bile as she realized the extent of Gregory's betrayal, not just emotional abandonment but calculated financial destruction. In a desperate search for financial documents, Fiona finally forced open the locked drawer of Gregory's desk, the wood splintering under the pressure of a fireplace poker. Inside, among tax documents and insurance policies, lay a smartphone she had never seen before. The device was password protected, but Gregory had always used the same code, 1215, their anniversary. The phone unlocked with a cheerful tone that seemed to mock her. The messages that filled the screen told a story so incredible that Fiona might have believed it fiction had she not been holding the evidence in her trembling hands. For 8 years, nearly the entirety of their renovation project on the Newport house, Gregory had been maintaining a second home and family in Connecticut. Messages to Karen and references to the kids painted a picture of domestic life running parallel to the one Fiona had believed was uniquely hers. The discovery sent Fiona to her bathroom, retching until nothing remained but dry, painful heaves that threatened to turn her inside out. When the physical symptoms subsided, a new sensation took their place, a crushing pressure in her chest that made breathing nearly impossible. The room began to spin, grey spots dancing at the edges of her vision as she fumbled for her phone. "I think I'm having a heart attack," she gasped when the 911 operator answered. The ambulance arrived with alarming speed, its siren cutting through the peaceful afternoon quiet of her neighborhood. Nancy appeared on the lawn in her gardening clothes as the paramedics helped Fiona onto a stretcher. "I'll follow you to the hospital," Nancy called, already moving toward her ancient Volvo. The emergency room doctor ruled out a heart attack, but diagnosed a severe anxiety attack exacerbated by Fiona's pregnancy. "Your blood pressure is dangerously high," he explained, his young face serious beneath a shock of prematurely grey hair. "Both you and your baby are at risk unless you can reduce your stress levels significantly." "That's not exactly within my control at the moment," Fiona replied, attempting a weak laugh that dissolved into silent tears. The prescription was clear and non-negotiable: complete bed rest for at least 2 weeks, with limited work and physical activity for the remainder of her pregnancy. The doctor's words echoed in Fiona's mind as Nancy drove her home, the implications becoming clearer with each passing mile. As an interior designer who specialized in hands-on renovation consulting, bed rest meant no income at precisely the moment she needed it most. What will happen when the bank takes my home? Will I deliver my baby in a homeless shelter? The questions circled like vultures as Fiona lay in bed that night, her hand resting protectively over the small swell of her stomach, now visibly present, even when she wasn't standing sideways in front of the mirror. What the doctor called rest, Fiona experienced as imprisonment. The quiet house became a tomb of memories, every corner haunted by the ghost of her marriage. The stack of unpaid bills grew taller on the kitchen counter. Their red "final notice" stamps a silent chorus of impending doom. With no income and rapidly dwindling savings, Fiona faced impossible choices about which essential services to maintain and which to sacrifice. Will the story take a turn for the better? Will Fiona find a way out of this impossible situation? Keep watching to find out what happens next in this emotional journey of betrayal and rebirth. The solution appeared unexpectedly one Sunday morning, as Fiona leafed through a decorating magazine, dog-earing pages out of professional habit despite her uncertain future. A feature on valuable vintage, identifying worth in inherited furniture, caught her attention, particularly the estimated values attached to pieces similar to those she had collected over years of estate sales and antique store browsing. The E.O. Victorian-era secretaire bookcase in her study, the one Gregory had complained took up too much space, was apparently worth considerably more than she had paid for it. The same was true for the Art Deco vanity in the guest room and the set of Queen Anne dining chairs she had reupholstered herself. With renewed purpose, Fiona photographed several pieces and listed them on an online marketplace, pricing them slightly below market value to ensure quick sales. The first to go was a Chippendale mirror that had hung in their entryway, purchased by a dealer who arrived the same afternoon with cash and careful hands. "Beautiful patina," the dealer commented, as he examined the piece. "You've maintained this exceptionally well." The compliment, along with the envelope of cash now in her possession, kindled something in Fiona that had been absent for months, a flicker of pride, faint but unmistakable, as word spread through Newport's tight-knit antiques community about quality pieces becoming available. More dealers made appointments to view Fiona's collection. Each sale brought both relief and sorrow. Financial breathing room purchased at the cost of parting with objects that had once represented her dream life. During one such appointment, a woman arrived who didn't fit the profile of the previous buyers. Where they had been professionally brisk, Tracy Martin was warmly curious, asking questions about the furniture's provenance and Fiona's restoration techniques, rather than immediately negotiating price. "You did this refinishing work yourself?" Tracy asked, running her fingers along the edge of a mahogany console table Fiona had rescued from a damp basement 2 summers earlier. "Most of it," Fiona admitted. "I studied conservation techniques when I was getting my interior design degree. It became something of a hobby." Tracy's eyebrows rose. "A valuable hobby. This workmanship is exceptional." She straightened, studying Fiona with new interest. "I own a small gallery downtown, Coastal Heritage. We feature local artists and craftspeople with a focus on maritime-inspired work. I've been looking for someone who does quality furniture restoration with a coastal aesthetic, but never expected to find them through a casual purchase." The conversation that followed changed the trajectory of Fiona's life in ways she couldn't yet imagine. Tracy's offer was simple but profound, a small corner in her gallery to sell Fiona's refurbished pieces with a generous commission split that favored the creator rather than the gallery. "I'm supposed to be on bed rest," Fiona explained reluctantly, gesturing toward her growing belly, "and most of my tools are in the basement. I'm not sure I can—" "What if you worked from here?" Tracy interrupted, her gaze traveling to the sun-filled attached garage visible through the kitchen window. "Convert that space into a workshop. Start small, with pieces you can manage while seated. Consider it a trial. If it doesn't work out, no harm done." After Tracy left with the console table and her business card tucked into Fiona's hand, a strange feeling settled over the house, an atmosphere of possibility that had been absent since the day Gregory walked out. For the first time, Fiona allowed herself to imagine a future shaped by her own hands, rather than by the wreckage of her marriage. The garage conversion began the following day, with Nancy's 17-year-old grandson Thomas helping to move Fiona's workbench and tools upstairs from the basement. The physical space transformation was accompanied by a subtle internal shift, as Fiona found herself focusing on color palettes and techniques rather than betrayal and abandonment. "This will be better for the baby anyway," Nancy observed as she helped organize the workspace, arranging brushes and sandpaper within easy reach of the padded chair Thomas had carried from the dining room. "No fumes in the basement, good sunlight for your eyes." And I can see you working from my kitchen window, so I'll know if you're overexerting yourself. The first project Fiona undertook in her new workshop was the restoration of a battered pine sea chest, its brass fittings green with verdigris and its wood surface deeply scarred. Working within the constraints of her pregnancy, she developed new techniques, using longer handles on tools to avoid stretching, taking frequent breaks to elevate her increasingly swollen feet, and keeping a timer nearby to remind her to rest. As her body expanded, so too did her vision for the pieces that passed through her hands. The sea chest emerged with a subtle whitewash that allowed the grain to show through, its hardware polished to a warm glow that suggested decades of gentle use rather than neglect. Inside the lid, Fiona painted a delicate compass rose, a private tribute to finding her own direction. When Tracy came to collect the chest for the gallery, her expression confirmed what Fiona already sensed. She had created something special. Within days, Tracy called with news. The chest had sold within hours of being displayed, and the buyer was asking about commissioning similar work. Have you or someone you know ever experienced a betrayal that eventually led to an unexpected new beginning? Drop your story in the comments below. As summer bloomed across Newport, Fiona's workshop became both sanctuary and launching pad. The steady income from her restoration work didn't match her previous design salary, but provided enough to negotiate a temporary forbearance on her mortgage, a breathless reprieve from the immediate threat of losing her home. The physical limitations of pregnancy pushed Fiona to innovate, developing a signature style that incorporated elements washed ashore on nearby beaches, sea glass embedded in drawer pulls, driftwood accents carefully preserved, and colors that captured the shifting moods of the Atlantic. Each piece told a story of reclamation and renewal that resonated with Tracy's clientele, many of whom were summer residents, furnishing historic homes along the famous Ocean Drive. Word of Fiona's work spread beyond Tracy's gallery, aided by carefully staged photographs shared on social media. Custom commission requests began to arrive, often accompanied by family heirlooms in need of respectful rejuvenation. With each project, Fiona refined her aesthetic and rebuilt her confidence, discovering that the skills she had once considered merely complementary to her design work were actually the foundation of a new creative identity. The irony wasn't lost on her. Just as her body was expanding with new life, her world was contracting to the focused dimensions of her workshop. Yet within those limitations, she found a clarity that had eluded her throughout 15 years of marriage. "You never talk about him anymore," Nancy observed one evening as they shared dinner on Fiona's porch, the older woman having appointed herself unofficial guardian of the mother-to-be. "Gregory, I mean." Fiona considered this as she pushed a roasted potato around her plate. "I think about him less," she admitted. "Or rather, I think about what I'm doing more than what he did. It's freeing." Nancy nodded, satisfaction evident in her expression. "That's how healing happens. Not all at once, but piece by piece. Like those projects of yours. You sand away the damaged layers until you find the solid wood beneath." The metaphor stayed with Fiona as she worked late into the evening on a set of dining chairs, carefully removing decades of inappropriate paint to reveal the beautiful maple hidden underneath. Each pass of the sandpaper was an act of faith that something whole and worthy remained beneath the surface, waiting to be rediscovered. 7 months into her pregnancy, just as Fiona was beginning to believe in the possibility of stability, an official-looking envelope arrived bearing the name of a law firm she didn't recognize. Inside were divorce papers, coldly efficient in their language, alongside demands for half the value of the Newport house, the very home Gregory had abandoned and nearly lost through financial neglect. The legal threat unleashed a new wave. of anxiety that sent Fiona back to the hospital, her blood pressure spiking dangerously as the baby shifted restlessly within her. This time, the doctor was less reassuring. "I'm concerned about preeclampsia," he explained, adjusting the blood and pressure cuff around Fiona's arm for a second reading. "We may need to consider early delivery if your numbers don't stabilize." The prospect of premature birth, combined with the financial devastation of Gregory's legal demands, created a perfect storm of stress that threatened everything Fiona had worked to rebuild. The lawyer she consulted confirmed her worst fears. Fighting Gregory's claims would require resources she simply didn't have. "He drained our accounts, nearly cost me my home, disappeared completely, and now wants half of everything." Fiona's voice rose as she paced the lawyer's Harbour View office. "How is that possibly fair?" "Family court isn't always about fairness," the attorney replied with practiced neutrality. "But there are aspects of your case that might persuade a judge to view things differently if we can document the financial abandonment and your efforts to preserve the asset he neglected." The conversation was interrupted by the attorney's assistant, who entered with an urgent message. Fiona's distress must have been evident because the assistant paused, offering an unexpected kindness. "My sister went through something similar last year," she said quietly. "There's a support group for women facing high-risk pregnancies and life stressors that meets at Newport Hospital on Thursdays. It helped her tremendously." Under normal circumstances, Fiona might have politely declined, her New England reserve making the thought of sharing personal struggles with strangers deeply uncomfortable. But normal had long since departed from her life, and desperation made her receptive to possibilities she would once have dismissed. The story of Fiona's situation spread through Newport's year-round community with the efficiency of a small town's invisible communications network. When she arrived at the Thursday support group, she discovered faces she recognized: the pharmacist who had filled her prenatal vitamins, the librarian who had helped her research furniture restoration techniques, and the owner of the hardware store who had delivered supplies to her home when bed rest made shopping impossible. "We've been wondering how to help," explained the group facilitator, a maternal woman whose warmth seemed capable of thawing the deepest New England reticence. "Now that you're here, we can ask directly." What followed was an astonishing display of community resilience. The local law firm where one group member worked offered pro bono representation to counter Gregory's demands. An accountant volunteered to document the financial abandonment and Fiona's subsequent efforts to save the house. Most surprisingly, Tracy proposed a pre-baby furniture showcase at her gallery, effectively a fundraiser disguised as a commercial event. The showcase was scheduled for early August, coinciding with Newport's busiest tourist season. Despite her doctor's concerns, Fiona threw herself into preparation, completing a collection of pieces that told a cohesive story of coastal resilience, furniture that had weathered storms and emerged renewed, much like the woman who restored them. Where will Fiona's journey lead next? Will she triumph over these new challenges? Don't miss what happens in the next part of this incredible story. 2 weeks before the showcase, as Fiona was applying a final coat of specialized sealer to a captain's desk that would be the exhibition centerpiece, a familiar sound interrupted her concentration: the purr of Gregory's vintage Mercedes in the driveway. After months of silence and absence, her husband appeared in the workshop doorway, looking both familiar and foreign. The casual elegance that had once made her heart flutter now seemed practiced, almost predatory in its careful arrangement. His tan suggested tropical locations, his expression a calculated blend of contrition and confidence. "Fiona," he said, her name in his mouth a presumption of continued intimacy that made her skin crawl. "We need to talk." The conversation that followed was a masterclass in manipulation, with Gregory cycling through tactics with practiced precision. He expressed shock at her extreme reaction to what he termed a temporary separation to process the unexpected news. He marveled at her physical transformation while suggesting concern about her hormonal state. He casually mentioned dismissing his legal actions as a goodwill gesture, while implying that her restoration business was a charming but ultimately unnecessary hobby they could discuss after things returned to normal. Throughout his performance, Fiona continued working, applying the sealer in careful, methodical strokes. Each layer strengthened and protected the wood beneath, just as the months of rebuilding her life had reinforced her sense of self. "You're not listening," Gregory finally snapped, his cultivated patience fraying at her continued focus on the desk rather than his words. "I'm listening," Fiona replied, her voice steady as she inspected the finish for imperfections. "I'm just not agreeing. There's a difference." "What exactly do you think is happening here?" Gregory demanded, frustration replacing the rehearsed contrition. Setting down her brush, Fiona finally met his gaze directly. "I think you're here because your other family discovered your deception. I think you've run out of places to hide, and you've convinced yourself that I'm the easier option to return to. I think you believe that pregnancy has made me vulnerable enough to welcome you back without questions." The accuracy of her assessment registered in the slight widening of his eyes, the momentary parting of his lips before he could reassemble his expression. In that unguarded instant, Fiona saw the truth. The man she had loved and mourned had never truly existed. "You need me," he countered, gesturing around the garage workshop as if it were evidence of her desperation rather than her resilience. "Look at how you're living. This isn't what we planned." "No," Fiona agreed, one hand resting on her rounded belly as the baby stirred within. "It's something I never dared to plan, a life that's authentically mine." The confrontation ended, not with dramatic accusations or tearful pleas, but with Fiona simply returning to her work, the steady rhythm of the brush signaling her complete refocus. After several minutes of increasingly uncomfortable silence, Gregory left, the sound of his car engine fading just as it had months earlier. Only this time, Fiona felt release rather than devastation in his departure. That evening, as she prepared for bed, Fiona entered the room that had once been designated as a home office, but had recently been emptied to become a nursery. The bare walls and vacant corners had intimidated her, the task of creating a child's first environment seeming too monumental to approach. Now, standing in the doorway, with Gregory's final departure still fresh, she suddenly saw the empty space with new clarity, not as an overwhelming project, but as an unwritten story awaiting her hand. The nursery transformation became a showcase of Fiona's evolving talents, incorporating elements from each phase of her journey. A rocking chair from Nancy's attic was stripped and refinished in a buttery yellow that captured the early morning light. Discarded wooden boat parts from the harbour workshop were repurposed into whimsical wall shelves. A damaged dresser rescued from the town's regular big trash day emerged as a changing table, with coastal maps decoupaged across its surface, sea glass drawer pulls created from beach finds, and a changing pad secured by cleverly disguised cleats. Tracy, visiting to finalize details for the upcoming showcase, was so impressed by the nursery that she insisted on photographing it for the gallery's social media. "This isn't just furniture restoration," she declared as she captured images of the cohesive space. "This is environmental storytelling through reclaimed objects. It's your most powerful work yet." The nursery photos, shared with Tracy's growing online following, generated an unexpected wave of attention. A regional lifestyle magazine requested a feature, leading to a professional photo shoot that captured not just the nursery, but Fiona's entire process, from beachcombing for materials to the final placement of restored pieces. As interest in her work expanded beyond Newport, The local community college reached out with an offer that both surprised and intrigued Fiona. A position teaching weekend workshops on furniture restoration with emphasis on sustainable techniques and local materials. The role would provide steady income to supplement her commission work, along with health insurance that would cover both her and her soon-to-arrive child. "They want me to teach?" Fiona questioned Nancy as they reviewed the formal offer letter on the porch swing that had become their regular meeting spot. "I'm still learning myself." "That's precisely why you'll be an excellent teacher," Nancy replied, her weathered hand patting Fiona's. "You remember what it's like not to know. The best guides are those who recall their own journey clearly enough to help others navigate similar terrain." The wisdom of Nancy's observation became clear as Fiona prepared for her first workshop, scheduled for after her baby's arrival. The process of organizing her techniques into teachable components forced her to articulate what had become intuitive, strengthening her own understanding while creating a framework others could follow. 2 weeks before her due date, with the nursery complete and her showcase preparations finalized, Fiona experienced the first fluttering contractions that signaled her body's preparation for birth. The sensations weren't painful yet, more like gentle reminders of the imminent transition from pregnancy to motherhood. "False alarm," the doctor confirmed after a brief examination at her regular appointment. "But I wouldn't plan any long trips. This little one is getting ready to meet you." The timing proved prescient. In the pre-dawn hours of a spectacular August morning, as the first hints of sunrise illuminated Newport Harbor, Fiona's water broke in a dramatic gush that startled both her and the tabby cat curled at her feet. The contractions that followed came with startling intensity, building quickly into a rhythm that left no doubt about what was happening. Nancy, who had extracted a promise from Fiona to call at any hour when labor began, arrived within minutes of receiving the early morning phone call. "Let's get you to the hospital," she said calmly, grabbing the pre-packed bag by the door as if midnight baby expeditions were routine in her life. Fiona's daughter arrived after 6 hours of labor, her birth coinciding with the opening day of Newport's annual Summer Arts Festival, where Fiona's furniture was prominently featured in Tracy's expanded booth. The baby, like her mother, seemed determined to forge her own timeline, arriving 2 weeks before her expected due date, but completely healthy, with a powerful set of lungs that announced her presence to the delivery room. "Olivia," Fiona whispered, cradling the tiny form against her chest as tears of exhaustion and wonder mingled on her cheeks. Olivia Nancy Reed. The middle name acknowledged the elderly neighbor who had become family during Fiona's darkest hours, while the last name, her own family name that she had kept when marrying, represented her daughter's true heritage. The community that had embraced Fiona throughout her journey celebrated Olivia's arrival with a spontaneous tradition borrowed from Newport's maritime history, a shore welcome, typically reserved for returning fishing vessels after a successful season. Tracy organized the impromptu gathering on the small beach visible from Fiona's hospital room, where dozens of neighbors assembled with handmade blue and white flags that rippled in the afternoon breeze. When a nurse helped Fiona to the window with Olivia in her arms, the assembled group raised their flags in unison, a silent, colorful greeting that broke through Fiona's postpartum exhaustion and brought fresh tears to her eyes. "You are so loved," she whispered to her sleeping daughter, "by so many more people than I ever imagined." The year following Olivia's birth unfolded with the rapid, transformative pace that seems unique to early parenthood. The garage workshop expanded into a small waterfront studio space when a local developer, whose wife had purchased one of Fiona's earliest pieces, offered below-market rent in exchange for a custom dining set for his own home. The larger space allowed Fiona to hire 2 assistants, both women rebuilding their lives after significant challenges. Janet, a retired naval officer struggling with civilian transition, brought precision and engineering expertise that perfectly complemented Fiona's more intuitive approach. Maria, a young single mother working toward her design degree, juggled childcare with Fiona, creating an informal cooperative that allowed both women to pursue their professional goals while ensuring their children were well tended. Fiona's furniture line, which she named Second Tides, in reference to both its coastal inspiration and the concept of renewal, developed a distinctive reputation that extended well beyond Newport. Her waiting list for custom commissions stretched to 6 months, and 3 national retailers had approached her about creating exclusive collections for their coastal-themed home furnishing lines. The final unexpected chapter in Fiona's transformation began on a crisp autumn day as she prepared her studio for a significant visitor, an editor from a prestigious national design magazine who was considering featuring Second Tides in their annual Artisans to Watch issue. The potential exposure represented a level of professional recognition that Fiona had never imagined possible in the days when she was selling her personal collection just to keep her home. As she arranged her workshop to showcase both process and finished pieces, the bell above the door chimed, announcing visitors well before the scheduled appointment time. Turning with a practiced, welcoming smile, Fiona froze at the sight of 3 unfamiliar figures, a woman approximately her age and 2 teenagers, a boy and girl who shared Gregory's distinctive hazel eyes and cleft chin. "Are you Fiona?" the woman asked, her voice steady despite the evident tension in her posture. "I'm Karen. I believe we have someone in common." The meeting that Fiona had occasionally imagined with dread during her darkest days unfolded with unexpected grace. Karen had discovered Gregory's deception much as Fiona had, through accidentally found evidence that revealed a carefully constructed double life. Unlike Fiona, Karen had confronted Gregory immediately, leading to his panicked departure and subsequent attempt to return to what he had considered his backup family in Newport. When he showed up after 3 months away, claiming to have been on a spiritual journey, "I already knew the truth," Karen explained as they sat in the small office adjoining Fiona's workshop, her children exploring the studio with curious glances at the woman their father had kept secret. "What I didn't know was whether you were a willing participant in the deception or another victim." The conversation that followed created a powerful connection between women who had once, unknowingly, shared not just a husband, but the experience of building lives around his elaborate lies. They compared timelines and discovered the calculated nature of Gregory's deceptions, how he had used business trips to maintain both households, how financial resources had been carefully partitioned to prevent discovery, and how he had manipulated each woman's individual vulnerabilities to maintain control. "We're not here for confrontation," Karen clarified, her gaze direct but not unkind. "We're here for closure." The kids needed to understand that they weren't somehow insufficient or unlovable, that this wasn't about them. And I needed to see the woman he described so differently in his panic to explain himself. The unexpected meeting transformed into an afternoon of shared understanding and, surprisingly, laughter, particularly when comparing Gregory's contradictory stories and excuses. The teenagers, initially awkward and defensive, gradually relaxed as they realized that Fiona represented not a threat to their family identity, but further confirmation of their father's responsibility for the fractured trust they were working to rebuild. Before departing, Karen paused at one of Fiona's recently completed pieces, a writing desk with hidden compartments, revealed only when specific elements were aligned in sequence. "This is remarkable," she said, running her fingers along the seamless joinery. "You've taken something broken and made it not just whole again, but better than before. There's wisdom in that process." The magazine feature that resulted from The editor's subsequent visit captured not just Fiona's craftsmanship, but the philosophy underlying her second Tides line. The article, titled "Restoration: The Art of Honourable Repair," positioned Fiona's work within a larger cultural conversation about sustainability, authenticity, and the value of objects with visible histories. 18 months after Gregory's rejection in her kitchen, Fiona hosted a special event at her expanded waterfront workshop, a transformation showcase featuring furniture pieces that told stories of radical renewal. Each creation represented a chapter in her journey from abandonment to empowerment, with descriptions that delicately balanced personal narrative with technical information about the restoration process. The showcase served as both celebration and launch for the Second Chances Foundation, a non-profit initiative that would provide vocational training for single parents facing unexpected life transitions. The Foundation's first project would be a comprehensive restoration workshop at the community college, with scholarships ensuring accessibility regardless of financial circumstances. As twilight descended over Newport Harbour, casting long golden reflections across the water visible through the studio's windows, Fiona watched her daughter take tentative steps across the polished wooden floor toward Nancy's outstretched hands. At 15 months, Olivia was a determined explorer, her personality already revealing the resilience she had inherited from her mother. Observing her daughter's journey across the room, each wobbly step followed by a triumphant grin, Fiona reflected on her own parallel path from devastation to reinvention. Gregory's rejection, once the most painful moment of her life, had ultimately revealed her true strength, connected her to an authentic community, and led her to a fulfillment deeper than she had ever experienced in 15 years of marriage. The coastal town that had witnessed her heartbreak now stood witness to her triumph, a community that had become the extended family her daughter would grow up within, diverse, supportive, and genuine in ways that Gregory's carefully constructed. Facades had never been. As Nancy lifted Olivia in celebration of her successful crossing, Fiona raised her glass in a silent toast, not to the absence of storms, but to the discovery that she was herself the harbour she had been seeking all along. Congratulations! Type 9 in the comments so that I know you stayed until the end with me. Thank you for watching, and until tomorrow's story on this same channel,